You go to the auctioneer or you go somewhere and you hear there's a small bit of land for sale, and you drive out full of hope and expectation. There's smallholders all over the world, and they come in many shapes and forms. So some smallholders make their living from the smallholding. Some people nowadays, they can work remotely, and some people go off farm. They go elsewhere in order to make their living, either part-time or full-time. So it can take many shapes and forms. So whether you have a quarter of an acre or you're up to whatever, 16, 20 acres, you're a smallholder. That's what you are. When you arrive, the first impression is very important. Do you like the feel of the place? And how is the access? So you've got to be quite practical, that you have to have access onto the piece of land. One of the first things that you should really look at is what buildings. It's very good if there's outbuildings on the farm, on the little bit of land that you come to look at, because it gives you a structure. But in my particular case, when I arrived here, there was nothing here, and this entire little farm, little holding, was covered in bushes. So I actually had to end up crawling underneath the bushes to see what the soil type was like and get a basic picture of the whole holding. So you have your small holding, and it's a field. It's a field, and you say, okay, I want to come from what we call the field to garden. Okay, so there's a whole pile of considerations to bear in mind. So what you have to do is, the very first thing is you have to do a site assessment. So you really have to look at what type of soil do I have, where is the water table. So you basically dig a hole during the winter, and you look to see how high the water table is when it's raining. Or else you fill it with water at this time of the year, and you see how long does it take to soak away. So you do this kind of basic assessment. How high is the water table? What direction is my garden facing in? So this particular garden here, it's sloping gently to the south, almost to the south. So it's near perfect. So naturally enough, if you're sloping to the south, you're at a major advantage, because the land will warm up quicker. When you buy a small holding, you have neighbours left and right of you, more than likely. So the reality is, particularly if they're older people, if they're older than yourself, the reality is that they have probably lived in this region for a long time, and they have an incredible amount of knowledge. They have an incredible amount of knowledge. So with the knowledge, some of the knowledge they have, so for instance, like, they have knowledge about the weather patterns, where the wind is coming from, what impact it'll have. Then also they have knowledge about the land. Even though the land is not belonging to them, maybe, they actually know the fields intimately, and they know it over several generations. One of the things that you have to remember about smallholding is that in order to, like any kind of business or any type of farm, it's a continuous investment process. Because what happens is you get really inspired by the holding, and you want to constantly improve it, and it doesn't stand still. That's the nature of farms and farming. It doesn't stand still. So you're always going forward, you're always investing. That doesn't mean you have to go crazy, but you've got to invest in order to improve the holding and essentially make your life easier. So what has happened for me, because I had quite a commercial focus here, and I was actually making my living as a market gardener, as well as having small holding activities like hens and cows and all that sort of stuff. So what I've had to do over the years is I've had to build a range of outbuildings. So I've been constantly building outbuildings as well as other activities, in order to have some place to get my machinery in out of the rain, for instance, or some place for me to work in the winter months repairing machinery or something like that. and even to store my hay and all that kind of thing. So I've been on this constant journey of building outbuildings as well as other land improvements. I've just arrived here with my David Brown tractor, with my small tractor, and the hens are in this coop. So it's a hen house and a run. And on a daily basis, I arrive here 365 days of the year, and I move the coop and the run on a section with the tractor. And what I'm doing is 85% of the feed that the hen gets, so they're getting a protein feed in order for them to lay their eggs, and 85% of that feed actually goes out their rear end as manure, and it's very rich in nitrogen and it's very rich in other nutrients, and basically it grows beautiful green grass and it grows beautiful clover. And something like, I've done kind of various calculations, but we'll say, so I only have 6 hens, because 6 hens are more than enough for the house. So with 6 hens, what we have is we're getting about 5 eggs a day, so we've 35 eggs a week. How many eggs would you eat in a week? So what I found out was that with 6 hens, I can actually keep 2 acres fertile. That can be my primary source of fertility for 2 acres. So I basically move around in a very systematic fashion around my 2 acres. So I've 1 acre here, I've 1 acre in front of the house, and that is my fertility program for those 2 acres. When you have a small holding, you really have to think about fertility. You might have fertility coming from the hens. Then you might also have fertility coming from compost or from other sources. So you really have to think about fertility, because you have to maintain the fertility on the holding. If the fertility goes down on the holding, what you'll end up with grass that's unpalatable to the animals, and the animals won't thrive. The animals will become unhealthy. So your animals at this time of the year should have a shine off them from eating grass, for instance, in the summer months. So you really have to think about the fertility. And it's phenomenal, the developments in the whole world of sustaining fertility on your holding. So what we have now is we have people all around the world that are putting a lot of emphasis on how to grow grass. So you've got all different types of theories, ideas and practices. And what you need to do is you need to arrive at the practice that's suitable to your soil type and your holding and your animals. So to give you an example, so what I have is I have a few workhorses, I have a couple of cows, and I have my poultry. So that's what's going on in my grassland. So I need to have enough winter feed for them, and I need to have enough grass for them for late spring, summer and autumn. And my practice is that I have my hens for about 2 acres, and then for the remaining 4 acres of my small holding, I have a practice going on whereby I have a rotation program with the animals, and then I graze my animals in the paddock, and then when the animals are finished grazing in the paddock, I go around with this little machine, a little mulch mower behind my David Brown tractor, and I slightly clip the top 1/3 of the grass. I don't clip it tight, and what I do is I just kind of nip it, and then that residue is a feed for my grassland. And so I'm kind of constantly, so my animals are going around, and it's about every 40 days, 45 days that I'm doing this clipping program. And then once a year, I have compost that I've made, and I spread that on the grassland. And that's usually in late September, early October that I spread it. So that's my program. and everybody needs to have their program. So one of the things about smallholding, as I said previously, is you're doing continuous improvement. And this particular triangle, even though it's quite small, it gives me a lot of pleasure. So it was an area where we used to store our round bales of silage for feeding the animals in the winter. And I said, okay, we're going to discontinue that practice. We're going to tidy up the whole area, and we're going to let this triangle, we're going to do something for nature here in this triangle. So what I did was we cultivated the area very lightly, and I sowed a multi-species cover crop. So I've got about 30 different species in here, and you can see butterflies, you'll see insects, you'll see lots of bees, and this is my kind of little biodiversity corner. So you have to visualize that I have a very small holding, but yet I want to do something specific for biodiversity here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this little triangle, it's a tiny, tiny area, it's less than a quarter of an acre. I'm going to let it run through its full cycle. So I seeded it, it was in flower, it now is producing seed heads, and then I'm going to leave it until next May. And basically any time over the next 12 months that you come up here, there will be an array of insects and birds feeding in this little corner. You've got to come from a field into a garden. And one particular method that I've devised over the years is this method. I call it East Clare No Dig. And here I'm standing in the middle of it. So basically what I do is I come along in the springtime and I roll out a few bales of old silage. So I get some old silage, punctured bales that are damaged. I roll them out, and then I raise in a series of pots and a number of plants, various kales, calendulas, pumpkins, all that you can see here, sweet pea. I raise these plants, and then when I've rolled out my silage, I raise the plants. And traditionally before this, up until this year, I would have planted through black plastic. So I put down a layer of black plastic to keep the weeds down in the first year. I put my plants in, and in the month of August, this is what you see. 5 or 6 months later, you see this amazing garden, and you've got lots of produce. And then what I do is I leave this garden intact for the winter. And in the winter time, I still have kale, I still have leeks to eat. I still have a few pumpkins that I've harvested. But what I leave is I leave everything. I leave all the flowers, I leave anything that's gone to seed, and I leave this amazing range of food for the insects. I also have some kale, etc. to eat myself. But the important thing is that the following year, when I take off the plastic, the soil is cultivated and it's ready to go in order to plant my potatoes. So it's a way of jump-starting your garden without using chemicals and without doing a lot of cultivation. So it's a very effective way of coming about having a garden. And I've experimented this year. So instead of using the plastic, I'm using saved rushes, and it has similar results as the plastic. So that's a win-win, to use less plastic. What does a domestic garden look like? So what a domestic garden looks like is much, much smaller than this. So basically what a domestic garden looks like is, so you look at the polytunnel here. So this polytunnel is 35 feet long by 14 foot wide. Okay, so there's enough plastic in that polytunnel. It covers enough an area of ground to feed a family of 4 in polytunnel produce for 52 weeks of the year. So I'm talking about an extensive range of vegetables. I'm talking about potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, cucumbers, French beans, basil, coriander, strawberries. I'm talking about an extensive range. Picture in season out of the polytunnel. So food 52 weeks of the year from the polytunnel, and growing tomatoes, we'll say, for instance, in the summer months. And then family of 4, garden, feeding yourself. what you have then is you have 2 times the size of that tunnel when you're quite skilled. 2 times the size of that tunnel, and in that area outdoors you would be growing carrots, main crop carrots, potatoes, onions, peas, all those type of crops. So the trick is to grow in a very, very small area, intensively well managed. So I'm saying a very small area. This particular area that we're standing in, if you go from the sunflowers to the cosmos here on this side, is 1,000 square meters. So it's actually 1/4 of an acre. I estimate that I can grow enough food here to feed 15 families. If you think about the home garden, what you should have in the home garden is you should have lots of biodiversity. So if you look in this garden, you see lots of colour, lots of flower. And what we have is we've got some Rudbeckia here. So Rudbeckia is a wonderful host plant for a parasitic wasp. That's a very good, that controls the cabbage white butterfly. We have some sweet pea over here in flower. They're very good for bees, they're good for other pollinators. So your home garden should look like this at this time of the year. There should be lots of colour. And I aim to have flowers flowering for most of the year in this garden. And when I think of home production, this is what I think of. I think of abundance, I think of colour, I think of flowers. You might consider getting a cow. The cow was always the essence of the smallholder. So they used to say that you need 1 acre for a cow. But the reality is that you probably need 2.5 acres if you're farming organically or you're not using artificial fertilizer. You need about 2.5 acres, depending on your soil type. And this cow's a beauty. She's a speckled park. So she's actually, you can see she's got quite an udder, so she can be a dual purpose cow. And so what you can actually end up doing as a smallholder is you can kind of half suckle, half milk. So you could have cow and calf together during the day, and then you could put the calf, you could separate the calf from the cow at night time and milk the cow in the morning and have sufficient milk for the house. That would be one option open to you. The second option is that you have the calf in a separate field entirely, or a couple of calves that you have ideally in a separate field entirely, and you milk the cow either once a day or twice a day. So you machine milk or hand milk the cow. And what you end up with is you end up with quite a lot of milk. So you have much more milk than you can drink. So you're basically into processing milk then. So you're into making soft cheese, into making yogurt, into making hard cheese. So you're into this whole world of processing milk, and it's fantastic, but it also is labor intensive. So you have to be conscious, how does that fit in with my lifestyle to have a house cow? And traditionally the house cows were on holdings where both people, will say you had two adults in the house and both people were at home and they took turns with milking the cow. But the cow is a great addition to the holding. And yeah, it's nice to have your own milk if you're drinking milk. Yeah, so I have this calf, and then I have 2 cows, 2 calves, and I'll end up with these animals for sale, the offspring, the calves. So that gives me a bit of a cash flow. Then also you could decide to go down the route of a workhorse. So if you went above an acre, and if you were somewhere between 1 acre and we'll say 6 acres, you would be what we call with a cob. So a cob is a low-sized horse, a bit bigger than a pony, that's quite strong, and they could do most tasks around the holding. So that's where you'd be at. And then, so that would bring you up to easily 6-7 acres. So you could have your tractor or you could have your cob. So one of these would do the work on your small holding quite comfortably. So one of these horses would plough, till, sow, cart, cut hay, turn hay, and carry tools around for basic maintenance. So the workhorse can replace the tractor. I suppose the advantage of the workhorse is that it's producing fertility. The tractor is consuming fossil fuel. But the thing with the workhorse is there's an incredible skill set involved with having a workhorse. So there's an incredible knowledge base around learning how to use the workhorse and use the implements associated with it. It's actually relatively easy to learn how to use a tractor and the implements associated with it. But with a workhorse, you're dealing with a living animal, and there's a lot more variables, and even the way the machinery works in the ground and its relationship with the soil is very different to a tractor. So you have to learn all those skills. But a workhorse, if you're that way inclined, is a fantastic addition to a smallholding. The pattern with smallholding and other forms of farm is that you have small animal, bigger animal, and basically the small animal follows the bigger animal. So what I had my cows in here grazing, and then when my cows went out, then I had my horses in here, and they just grazed the small amount, and then I followed with my hens. And what the hens do is they actually mop up any parasites there is from the bigger animals. So they're a very valuable addition to a holding. And also the hens are bedded on straw or on shavings. They would be two of the primary sources. And that type of fertility from their house, where their house closed in each night, is used in the compost heap. So all round, poultry are a picture of the holding. So let's say you buy a small holding and it's 1/4 of an acre, or it's 1/2 an acre. You're probably with a wheelbarrow and a few basic tools, maybe a strimmer or something like that. So very basic amount of tools, and you can keep the holding in good shape, and you can have your hens, and you can grow your food, and you could actually have a simple portable run for the hens that you could actually move yourself and that type of thing. So I often say to people, if you're kind of below an acre, you're wheelbarrow territory. That's what you are as a smallholder. And then when you go above an acre, you're kind of thinking, okay, I need to think a small tractor. I need a small tractor. I need a few basic bits of kit, and I need to be able to, maintain the fields, do a bit of topping, move compost around, that type of thing. I'm on a slightly bigger scale. So you'd have your little old tractor. Smallholder could decide to be a market gardener. So it's not an uncommon practice. So picture this scenario that you've got your poultry, you've got your orchard, you've got maybe 1 or 2 other animals. So you've got that activity going on. And then you decide, okay, and also you have a garden where you're growing enough potatoes or something. You're feeding yourself basically with vegetables. But then you zone in and you decide to be a market gardener. And what usually happens in these circumstances is you decide, I'm going to grow a limited range of crops. So if you set out and think, oh, I enjoy being a gardener, and I grow 35, 40 crops, which is not unusual in order to feed your family. But if you decide to be a market gardener, if you try to grow 35 or 40 different crops, it can be really difficult because your energy is spread in too many areas. So what happens what happens now in the society that we live in, and people with the demands on their time and on their money and all of that sort of thing, what happens is that people tend to specialize as market gardeners. And there is a formula to it. So basically, if you have a small area, you tend to grow 3 or 4 quite lucrative crops that complement one another. So it would be quite common that you've got a small area of ground, it's quite intensive market gardening, such as this garden here, and you end up growing kale, spinach, rocket and salad leaves. And there's a very ready market available for this type of food. So you'd have a small range of crops, you grow a high volume of them in a small area of ground. So we'll say this area here is divided into a number of beds. Now in some of the beds there's cover crops in because we've finished cropping with the salad for this year. But here in front of me I have a bed of lettuce. And what I'm aiming for is I'm aiming in order to have a continuous supply of leaves to put in a bag to sell as salad leaves. And so it's intensive work. You're sowing the seed, you're planting the crop, you're harvesting the crop, you're selling the crop, and then you're constantly replacing. You have a staggered method of production, and you're planting a new crop as you go along. So you can see that the lettuce is at different stages here. But there's various people around Ireland doing this now, that they're intensive market gardeners growing a range of crops, and they can make quite a nice living from it. Central to that concept of growing market garden crops is that you grow healthy soil. So you can see with this soil, I can put my hand in quite easily. And when I turn up the soil, see how easily I can dig it? And the soil is really friable, quite nice looking. We often describe it like chocolate cake. So your skill as a grower, as a gardener, must come up a notch if you intend to be a market gardener. But it's a very viable option for smallholders to consider being an intensive market gardener. I had £200 and a bicycle. That's what I had when I started. So we had 2 bicycles and £200 and nothing but full of ideas and idealism. But the other thing I had was I come from a farming background and I come from a market garden background. I had a fundamental training in horticulture, and I also had this wealth of knowledge from my grandparents and my parents. And I was quite confident that I could make a living on, even if you just gave me 1 acre, I could actually make a living. I could make enough money to make my way in life and to have a family and all those kind of things. So I had that kind of confidence as a result of my training and my experience growing growing vegetables and selling vegetables with my parents. So that was actually worth $1 million, that particular aspect of it. But it's open to everybody. You can have no background in farming, no background in horticulture, nothing like that, and you can learn on the job as you go. It's open to everybody. It's not an exclusive domain of people.